Welcome to Keith's Pi Tutorials. I'm Keith Ellis. Today I'm going to speak to you about setting up the Raspberry Pi Model A with just one USB port and without the Ethernet. And the way I'm going to be setting it up is a headless install, so I'm not going to be using a keyboard or mouse or monitor. It's going to be set up from scratch using this USB to serial console cable. By the end of this tutorial, we'll have a Model A Raspberry Pi set up on the network running so we can connect to it through SSH. I'm not going to put a VNC client on it, for my purposes that's not what I need. I'm going to be using it to control a little robot car, so SSH is fine for me. And for the purpose of these tutorials, my setup at home, I've only got Macs, so it's going to be from a Mac perspective. I will point out where you can get instructions for Windows and Linux if they're available. I've found them easily enough. So hopefully this will be useful to you. So the first thing we're going to do is download the Raspbian image file. So we're going to go to the raspberrypi.org website. I've heard this website's going to be changing shortly, so it might be in a very slightly look very slightly differently when you come to look at it. But go down to the Downloads tab, scroll down, you'll go past all the Noobs images, and then you'll get the Raspbian image file. So if you click that, and that will download. Whilst the image is downloading, we can prepare our SD card. So we need at least a 4GB SD card for this Raspbian image. I did try it with a 2GB one initially and couldn't work out why it wasn't working, but you do need a minimum 4GB SD card to fit the Raspbian image onto it. So we're going to go into Disk Utility. We put our SD cards into the slot inside of the computer. Let's get rid of iPhoto, we don't want that. Now we're in Disk Utility and we're going to select our SD card. Make sure you select the top level SD card and not one of the partitions. And we're going to format it as a Mac MS-DOS format partition. Then click the Erase button in Disk Utility. And that will erase that. We'll enter our admin passwords. To do this whole operation, in fact, we will need admin rights. So make sure you've logged in as an admin user. While we're here, actually, if you click on your, I don't do it in the video, but you could click on the info button at the top, and that will tell you what disk your SD card is. It's important you know what disk your SD card is. We'll come to use that later. I do show you a slightly different method of getting there. So our disk image is now downloaded, and you can see there in the downloads folder. Just while we're on the Raspbian site, there's a link here which will take us to the instructions for setting up an SD card. You'll see we're on the Raspberry Pi Easy SD card setup. There's various sections of this page. So there's the easy setup, basically buy an SD card with a distro already installed, which is the easy safe method. Or you can create your own using Noobs software, which is easily downloadable from the raspberrypi.org website. I did try, I believe you can do a headless install with Noobs, but I couldn't quite get it working. So I'm just going to download I've downloaded the Raspbian image, and we're going to follow the instructions for setting up the Raspberry image on our SD card. There's instructions here for Windows and the OS Mac here. There's various ways to do it on the Mac. I use the mostly graphical method, but there is a bit of command line required as well. As I mentioned earlier, we need to find out what disk our SD card reader is. So if we go into About My Mac and click on System Report, and then on the left hand side there, if we go down to USB, and in the list there in the main pane you should find your SD card reader. So, oops, that's the wrong one, the one above it, that's it. And then in the bottom pane you should see a section which says BSD drive or disk, and our one there is, it says disk 4. I've done this twice, so you want to be careful. This disk number can change. Later on in the tutorial you'll see I use disk 2. Back to the Mac instructions now. There's a command line here, the DD command, which we're going to use to copy the disk image from our computer over to the SD card. Just before we do use that command though, it's important we've selected the partition on our SD card in Disk Utility and unmount it. Don't eject it, but we must have it unmounted, otherwise the DD command won't be able to write to it. Just before we use this DD command, I'm just going to double check the drive number, because if we get it wrong we could end up writing over our main hard drive or some other disk in our machine. So that BSD number is disk 2. I've actually shut down and restarted whilst doing this tutorial, so that's why I've got a different number now. So we're going to go into Terminal and CD into our downloads directory, do an ls, and we can see our Raspbian image there which we downloaded earlier. Now I'm just going to paste this command. This is the DD command we copied out off the website, and the first bit we need to do is put the Raspbian image name in there. So we're doing sudo dd if is the input file, so we're going to put the Raspbian image file name in there, and then of is the output file, and we want to make sure we've got dev/disk2. That's the important disk number we've been looking for. Earlier I had disk 4, this time it's disk 2, so you must make sure you get the correct disk before you run this command. Then press enter and it will just sit there. It won't look like it's doing anything, but it is. You can press Ctrl T to bring up this listing, and it will show you how many bytes it's written and in how many seconds. So just bear with it, it will probably take half an hour or more, and you can just occasionally press Ctrl T just to make sure it's continuing. So we'll just let that run. So this screen captures from the first time I tried writing this onto a 2 GB SD card, and you can see there just at the bottom it says dev disk 2 end of device. That's basically telling me my SD card isn't big enough. So I've now got the Raspbian image copied over to a 4 GB SD card there, and you can see it's mounted on the desktop. So we'll eject that and take it out of the Mac, and we'll need that later. So now we're going to get the drivers for the console cable, and I use the Adafruit website here, so adafruit.com. If you go to their main page, there's a Raspberry Pi section, scroll through, and there's a tutorial actually on setting up the console cable and using it to connect to a Raspberry Pi. So doesn't look like it's on this page. Let's try the next page. So let's scroll down, and there it is. It's got the console cable there. Raspberry Pi lesson 5 using a console cable. So this page has got the links to download the drivers. So we'll scroll down, find the links, and get them drivers. So I'll just move through the pages. You can see it is a good tutorial actually, so you might want to read this. We'll get to the software page. So this is the software installation for a Mac. So we need this second link here. We'll click on that to download the drivers. That will take us to this website. Again, there's clear instructions on how to use it, and the download link is right at the bottom of the page. So as we head down, we'll go and get that link. So keep going, and there we go. That's the drivers for the console cable downloading. There it is. So we'll open it up. Actually, if you're on the latest version of Mac OS, it won't let you open it up. I'm on Mountain Line here, so we'll need to go down to the download folders, right click on it and click open, and then OK, and that should then install. So we'll let that install. Once that's finished installing, I'll show you how to connect up the console cable. Okay, let's have a look at this console cable. So we've got a USB plug, and inside there's a USB to serial converter chip. At the other end, we've got 4 leads. We've got the black one, which is ground, red one, which is plus 5 volts, and then we've got a white one, which I think is receive, and a green one, which is transmit. So we're going to use just 3 of them. We're not going to use the red one. The red one you can actually use to power your Raspberry Pi from the serial cable. I've done that in the past and got carried away using my Mac, and rebooted my Mac, realised I've taken the power away from the Raspberry Pi, so I'm now very conscious of not doing that, and I like to power the Pi from a dedicated supply. So these 3 pins, the black, the green and the white, are going to connect onto the I/O pins of the Raspberry Pi. So in this corner here we've got pin 1 and pin 2. So this is 3.5 volts and 5 volts. Next to that you've got another 5 volts on pin 4. Pin 6 is ground. So we're going to be connecting the black to pin 6. Next we've got the white pin, the white cable, that's going to connect onto pin 8, which is GPIO pin 14. And that's the transmit, the Raspberry Pi transmit, or the USB receive. Then moving on, we've got the next pin, which is pin 10, or GIO pin 15, and this is where we connect the green cable, which is the Raspberry Pi receive, or the console cable transmit. We'll plug black in, then the white, and then the green. So that's how it looks. So there we've got pin 1 and 2, pin 3 and 4. Then we've got the ground, then we've got pin 8 and pin 10. Right, back onto the website. We've, as you can see here, there's the Windows instructions, and there's also a section on how to connect the leads. You can see they've got the 5-volt power supply connected there, which will power the Pi. But we're going to move on to test and configure. And there's a command here, this screen command, which we're going to copy. We'll copy that. We'll paste that in. It's screen space /dev/cu.pl, and then we'll press the tab key, and that finishes the command for you. Then we just need to add the baud rate, which is 11:52:00. Before we carry on, we're just going to do a few checks. So we've got our Pi with the SD card, the newly flashed SD card, plugged in. We've got our console cable plugged into the Pi's GPIO ports, and we've got the serial cable plugged into the USB of our laptop or computer. So we'll press enter to set that command running, and you can see the screen, the computer's now looking for our Pi, and we'll plug in the Pi and see what happens. And there we go, we've got our Raspberry Pi booting up without a monitor. And we can see the output on our screen here reported through the console cable. So we'll log in. Default login is Pi, password is Raspberry. And once we're logged in, we're just going to go through a few housekeeping exercises. You can see there's a notice at the bottom of the screen which is advising us to run sudo space raspi-config. So we'll do what it suggests, type that in, and we'll go through the Raspberry Pi config screen. Now it's going to look a bit different. Normally there's a bit of colour in here when you log in or go through an SSH screen, but because we're going through the console, it's very much just pure text, and we've still got the same functionality, but it just doesn't look quite the same. So we're going to first expand the file system on the SD card, so we make the most out of our SD card. I think the Raspbian image is about 3 GB, so if you're using an 8 GB SD card, you'll gain 7 GB of space. So once that's done, we'll get a message saying it will be resized upon reboot, but we can carry on with the other options. So the next option, change user password. I'm a bit of a stickler for security, so I always change my passwords. Anyone with a Pi will know the standard passwords. If you've got anything on there, you know, whether it's sensitive or not, it's always good practice to change your password. So next, we're going to overclock. Now this is up to you, this is optional, but it's pretty easy to do. So if we click OK here, I'm just going to set the medium just to get a little bit of extra out of my Pi. And we'll go into the advanced options now. And then we'll go into the memory split. I'm not running my Pi with a graphical user interface, so there's not much points giving an allocation of memory to the graphical user interface, so I'll select the minimum 16 megabytes there, and then back into advanced options again, and finally SSH. We'll enable SSH, which will allow us to log into our Pi over the wireless once we've got that set up. And then finally, tab twice, click finish, and we'll reboot our Pi. Once the Pi is rebooted, we'll just log in and make sure our new password's working. and hopefully we shall get to our bash command prompt. There we go, all done. The last thing to do now is to set up the wireless connection. So there's various ways of doing this. I've chosen probably the simplest way to get us up and running initially. Now I have noticed something using this terminal cable, the console cable. When I use the text editor Nano, for some reason when I edit some of these config files I'm about to go through, it looks right on the screen, but the Pi just won't accept it. So the only way I've found of overcoming this is to create the files I want in TextEdit on my Mac and make sure they're right. I can copy that text directly out of TextEdit. Then I can go into Nano, delete the file, all the text in the file, and paste this, paste in the file I want and save it. And it seems to work that way. Not sure why it is. Maybe it's something strange with the console. Maybe it's something peculiar with the Mac. But it took me several hours to figure this out. I was scratching my head. Why is my wireless not working? And it turned out, for some reason, the file, although it looks 100% correct, the Raspberry Pi just isn't accepting it. To set the wireless up, the file we need to edit is /etc/network/interfaces. Now I've created two files on my desktop here, one for a static IP address and one for a DCHP address to be given by a router. So you'll see the top two lines here are a given, we must have them. This third line here, that I've been playing about with this seems to auto run the wireless on boot. If we haven't got that, we have to start the wireless up automatically. So we need that file in there, that line in there. The next block is if we want to have roaming set up. So roaming allows us to configure the Pi to connect to multiple networks. Now I'm not going to cover that here. We're going to use the managed setup. So we only need this one file. We can enter our SSID of our router in there and password. Now this is plain text, so it's not secure. There is a secure way of doing it, but I'm not going to cover that here. And then the final few lines are the IP address we want given to our Pi, the subnet mask, which are 255.255.255.0 should work for most people, and then our router address. Now if we look at the DCHP one, the only difference is we've got rid of static and written in DCHP, and we've got rid of all the IP address settings. So it's up to you which you choose. It might be easier to choose static initially so we know where we're going to SSH into later. So we'll log into our Pi, still through the console cable obviously, and I'm going to open up the interfaces file. So with sudo nano /etc etc/network/interfaces, and that will open up this file. And as discussed earlier, I'm not going to try editing this, I just can't get it to work, so I'm going to use Control-K to delete every line. Then I'm going to go back to a text edit file, copy the whole file, on the Mac it's Command-C, and then Command-V to paste it into a Nano editor. So that's it. Now avoid editing this. If you do, it may not work. You'd obviously want to change your SSID and your passphrase before you copy it into this file. So we're going to exit now. Control X to exit. Press OK to agree the file name, which we haven't changed, and then we'll do a sudo reboot. And hopefully when we boot up, our network should be working. So your Pi is now booted up. We'll log in, and hopefully at this point your Wi-Fi dongle should have a flashing light on it to indicate it's got a connection. Now we'll just give it a few seconds to get an IP address, and to confirm it's got an IP address we'll type in the command ifconfig, and as we have a look in the WLAN 0 section, we've got an iNet address, there's our IP address, and it looks like we're all up and running. Now just to double check, we'll do a ping. I'm going to ping my blog, but you can ping www.google.com or any site you like, and we should get a return. The ping's being returned from that, as we see now. So once you've got a few back, we'll just press Control C to cancel that, and then we're done. So to exit out of this console, one thing I haven't mentioned so far, the command to exit from the console to get back to your Mac terminal is Control A, release all the keys, then press D, and that detaches the console cable, and that should get you back to your standard terminal. So now the final test. I'm going to detach the console cable from the machine physically, and I'm going to SSH into our Pi at the IP address we've given it. So SSH space Pi at the IP address of your Pi. Now you'll note I've got this message. I previously had this Mac set up to auto log in. So if you do see this screen, if you type SSH-keygen space -R and the IP address of your Mac, enter, that will remove the keys from your Mac, and it will allow you to log into your Raspberry Pi. So we'll try the SSH command again. It's unlikely you'll see that screen, but I left it in there just in case it does come up. So hopefully we'll now get a connection. So you'll get this the first time you do it. You need to type yes here, otherwise it throws an error. I think I'll just type Y. Let's see, it's asking me to type yes. So I type yes, and then it's asking me for my Raspberry Pi password. So I'll type a Raspberry Pi password in now, and there we are. Command prompt on our Raspberry Pi. Just doing ls. Yeah, we've got a directory list in there, and we're connecting over SSH. So in summary, we have got a Pi, a blank SD card, we've formatted the SD card, we've installed, we've flashed it with the Raspbian distro, we've plugged that into the Pi, we've set up the Pi using our console cable, set up the network, enabled SSH, and we can now log into our Pi over SSH, and we're free to do what we like. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you've got any comments, please leave them below, or get in touch via Twitter, and hopefully there'll be a few more tutorials coming along soon. Ones I've got in mind are maybe a bit more Wi-Fi connection options. We'll go through the roaming setup using the WPA-supplicant.com file, and maybe a little bit on security as well. Thank you very much.